piece property lines and the first knock. When I bought my house in Charlotte, I wasn't chasing luxury. I was chasing quiet. 15 years of overtime shifts, careful budgeting, and saying maybe next year to vacations had led me to that closing table. The house wasn't a mansion, but it was solid brick exterior, wide front windows, and a maple tree that turned gold every fall. The backyard sealed the deal. A modest in-ground pool, fenced in with clean cedar panels, private and perfectly placed to catch the late afternoon sun. The first evening after moving in, I floated on my back in that pool and listened to nothing. No traffic hum. No apartment neighbors arguing through drywall. No sirens cutting through the night. Just the low hum of crickets and the soft rhythm of water against tile. It felt earned. The neighborhood, Greenfield Oaks, looked like something pulled from a brochure. Trim lawns, identical black mailboxes, American flags hanging from porches at careful, symmetrical angles. Everything was neat, predictable, stable. Stable is the word the realtor used. I later realized stable can also mean unchanged. On my first morning, I walked the block with a cup of coffee, introducing myself to anyone outside. A couple of polite nods. One older man gave a firm handshake but didn't make eye contact. A woman watering her hydrangeas smiled tightly and asked, "Are you renting or?" "I bought it," I said. Her eyebrows lifted just slightly before she recovered. "Oh, well, welcome." It was subtle. Nothing you could point to directly. Just small pauses in conversation. Quick glances that lingered half a second too long. The kind of curiosity that isn't about friendliness but about confirmation. Greenfield Oaks was overwhelmingly white. That wasn't an assumption, it was visible. Front yard birthday parties. Book club flyers posted on the community board. Joggers in matching neighborhood 5K shirts. And me. I'd been the only black man in rooms before. Corporate boardrooms. Suburban grocery stores at midnight. That wasn't new. What felt different was the ownership. I wasn't visiting. I wasn't renting. I wasn't passing through. I lived there. The Homeowners Association made its presence known within the first week. A crisp envelope taped to my door welcomed me to the Greenfield Oaks Homeowners Association and reminded me of trash day, lawn height regulations, and approved exterior paint colors. I skimmed the bylaws carefully. If I'd learned anything navigating professional spaces, it was this: know the rules better than the people enforcing them. There was nothing unusual. Standard suburban stuff. Lawn maintenance. Fence upkeep. Parking restrictions. The pool, clearly marked within my property lines on the survey, fell entirely under my responsibility, which meant entirely under my control. The first odd thing happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I came home from work to find a bright pink beach ball floating in the deep end. I stared at it for a moment. Maybe it had blown in. Kids lived nearby. I shrugged it off and tossed it onto the patio. The next day, there were wet footprints on the concrete. Not mine. I stood there longer this time, scanning the fence line. The gate was latched. Nothing broken. No obvious damage. Just faint evidence that someone had been comfortable enough to step into my space. Still, I gave the neighborhood the benefit of the doubt. On Saturday morning, I was trimming hedges when I felt eyes on me. Across the street stood a woman with a precise blonde bob haircut and a posture that suggested authority in small doses. She wore pressed khakis and a polo embroidered with the HOA logo. She smiled when our eyes met. Not warm. Not hostile. Measured. Later that afternoon, she knocked on my door with 2 other board members in tow. "Welcome to Greenfield Oaks," she said brightly. "I'm Karen, HOA president." Of course she was. They handed me a printed packet, duplicate of what I'd already read. Karen did most of the talking. She asked about my job, how long I'd been in the area, whether I had family nearby. Then her eyes drifted past me toward the backyard. "Oh," she said lightly, "you're in the pool house." "The what?" "The lot with the pool," she clarified. Historically, that's been a bit of a community perk. I felt something tighten in my chest. "It's in my backyard." "Yes," she said smoothly. "Technically. But the previous owners were generous. The neighborhood kids have always enjoyed access during summer." Access. The word lingered between us. "I didn't see anything about shared access in the bylaws," I replied. Karen's smile thinned by a fraction. It's more of an understanding. Understanding for whom? I kept my tone even. Well, I plan to use it privately. A pause. Not long. Just enough. We'll discuss expectations at the next meeting, she said. Expectations. After they left, I stood in my kitchen staring out at the water shimmering under late afternoon light. It didn't look communal. It looked like property taxes, insurance premiums, maintenance costs. It looked like mine. That Sunday I heard laughter. High-pitched. Carefree. I stepped into the backyard and froze. 2 children I didn't recognize were sitting on the edge of my pool with their feet in the water. The gate was open. And across the fence, Karen stood watching like this was the most natural thing in the world. When she saw me, she waved. "Oh good," she called out. The kids were hoping to cool off. Something small and cold settled in my stomach. This wasn't about a beach ball. It wasn't about a misunderstanding. It was about assumption. About who is expected to share. About who is expected to comply. And as I walked toward that fence, I realized the quiet I thought I had purchased came with conditions no one had written down, but everyone seemed to understand. The meeting, the assumption, and the line in the water. For the next few days I tried to return to normal. Work in the morning. Gym after. Quiet dinners at the kitchen island. A slow swim at dusk. On the surface, nothing had changed. The water still reflected the sky the same way. The maple tree still rustled softly over the fence. But the neighborhood felt different. Eyes lingered longer now. When I jogged past the cul-de-sac, conversations would soften mid-sentence. A couple walking their golden retriever paused just enough to watch me pass. It wasn't open hostility. It was surveillance disguised as curiosity. The beach ball returned 2 days later. This time it was accompanied by a folded towel draped over one of my patio chairs. I didn't throw it back over the fence. Kept it. Saturday morning arrived with a printed reminder in my mailbox. HOA community meeting. Mandatory attendance encouraged. Encouraged. The meeting was held at the small clubhouse near the entrance of Greenfield Oaks. Brick exterior. Fluorescent lights. Rows of metal folding chairs. The walls were lined with framed photos of past block parties. Faces that all blended into the same demographic story. I took a seat in the second row. Karen stood at the front beside a whiteboard, clipboard in hand. Her smile was polished and public. "We're so glad to see strong participation tonight," she began, scanning the room before her gaze briefly settled on me. The agenda covered landscaping standards, mailbox repainting, and holiday decoration timelines. Routine. Predictable. Then she cleared her throat. "Next," she said, "we need to address the pool access concern." Concern. Several heads turned toward me. "As many of you know," Karen continued, "the lot at 1847 Maple Run has traditionally allowed community children supervised use of the swimming area." Murmurs of agreement rippled across the room. I raised my hand. "Yes," she said, already knowing. "Is there a bylaw requiring shared access to private amenities?" I asked evenly. A pause. "Well," she replied, shifting her weight, "not explicitly. But Greenfield Oaks has always operated cooperatively." Cooperatively. An older man from the back spoke up. "The Smiths never had a problem with it." There it was again. The Smiths. "I'm not the Smiths," I said calmly. "And I'm responsible for liability, insurance, and maintenance. If someone gets hurt in my pool, that's on me." A younger woman crossed her arms. "So you're just going to keep it to yourself?" The word just hung in the air like an accusation. "I purchased a home with a private pool," I replied. "That's not unreasonable." Karen stepped forward slightly, lowering her voice into something almost sympathetic. "It's about community spirit," she said. "We don't want to create division." Division? I looked around the room, 30 faces, all watching me as if I were the disruption. As if I'd changed something fundamental simply by enforcing a boundary. "I'm not creating division," I said. "I'm maintaining my property." Silence. Then Karen smiled again, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. "We'll revisit this," she said briskly, moving on to the next agenda item. The meeting ended with polite applause and tight smiles. As people filtered out, I caught snippets of conversation. "Some people just don't get how we do things here. Moved in and already changing everything." Not very neighborly. Not very neighborly. I walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, my footsteps steady but my thoughts loud. The next morning I installed a small lock on the inside of my gate. Nothing dramatic. Just practical. That afternoon Karen appeared again. She didn't knock this time. She stood outside the fence, hands on hips. "You locked it," she called out. "Yes. That sends a message." "Yes," I agreed. Her jaw tightened. "You're isolating yourself." "I'm protecting myself." She glanced around as if gathering an invisible audience. "You know," she said carefully, "this neighborhood was built on trust." I met her gaze. Trust works both ways. For a moment neither of us spoke. The air felt heavier than the humidity justified. "People are talking," she finally said. "I'm aware." She studied me like I was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "You're new," she said again. "You don't understand the history." "I understand property lines." That ended the conversation. But it didn't end the tension. By Tuesday, I received an email from the Greenfield Oaks Homeowners Association stating that structural modifications to fencing may require board approval. The lock. They were calling a $12 hardware store lock a structural modification. I responded with a screenshot of the bylaw section outlining approved homeowner security measures. No reply. That evening as I floated in the pool, I noticed something new. Two neighbors standing at the edge of their yard, watching silently. Not waving. Not smiling. Just watching. It wasn't the pool anymore. It was the principle. The idea that ownership when it looks like me is negotiable. The idea that access is owed. The idea that saying no makes you the aggressor. The water rippled gently around me as the sun dipped below the rooftops. From a distance, the neighborhood still looked postcard perfect. Trim lawns, symmetrical porches, soft golden light reflecting off identical mailboxes. But underneath that polish was something else. Something unspoken. And I had a feeling the next move wouldn't be a beach ball or a towel. It would be bigger. Because when people believe something belongs to them, even when it doesn't, they don't stop at polite disagreement. They escalate. Cameras, complaints, and the word community. By the third week, I had settled into a routine again, or at least I pretended to. Morning coffee on the patio. Work calls from the dining room. Evening laps in the pool while the sun sank behind the uniform rooftops of Greenfield Oaks. From a distance, it probably looked serene. A man enjoying the home he worked hard for. Close, it felt different. I installed 2 security cameras, one facing the gate, one covering the pool deck. Not because I wanted to live under surveillance, but because I was starting to feel like I already was. The boxes arrived on a Thursday afternoon. By Friday evening, they were mounted and recording. Saturday morning, I woke up to my first HOA violation notice. Subject: unauthorized exterior installations. I stared at the email from the Greenfield Oaks Homeowners Association and read it twice. The cameras apparently were visually disruptive to neighborhood cohesion. Visually disruptive. The identical satellite dishes on half the houses weren't disruptive. The oversized inflatable reindeer still sitting on someone's lawn in February weren't disruptive. But my 2 small matte black cameras? Disruptive. I replied with the bylaw section outlining homeowner security rights. Again. No response. That afternoon as I skimmed emails, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the backyard camera. Karen. She was standing at the fence, reading something aloud to a woman beside her. I watched the live feed in silence. "She's within her rights," the other woman said faintly. Karen shook her head. "Not the way he's doing it. He. Not my name. Just he." I stepped outside. "Can I help you?" I called across the yard. Karen startled slightly but recovered quickly. "We were just discussing aesthetics." "On my property?" "It affects the whole community," she replied. There it was again. Community. A word that sounded warm until you realized it often meant conformity. The following Monday, a certified letter arrived. This one claimed that the pool itself might violate intended communal usage agreements established by the original developer. I laughed out loud in my kitchen. They were rewriting history. I pulled out my closing documents, property survey, and title insurance paperwork. Every line was clear. The pool sat entirely within my lot. No easements. No shared access clauses. No special conditions. Still, the tone of the letter wasn't about legal footing. It was about pressure. That evening, as I trimmed hedges along the fence, a pickup truck slowed noticeably while passing my house. The driver didn't wave. He stared. Across the street, two neighbors chatted in low tones, glancing over occasionally. Greenfield Oaks remained outwardly pristine. Lawns etched perfectly, flags hanging straight, children riding bikes in careful loops around the cul-de-sac. But I had started noticing patterns. When I walked into the clubhouse gym, conversations stopped. When I swam at dusk, curtains shifted. When I locked my gate, someone always seemed to be watching. One Wednesday afternoon, I came home to find something new. A printed sign taped to my fence. Pool Access Restoration Meeting, Saturday 2 p.m. Restoration. Like something had been stolen. I peeled it off slowly, folded it once and slipped it into my pocket. Saturday arrived warm and humid. The kind of day that makes pool water shimmer invitingly. I stayed inside most of the afternoon, watching the backyard camera feed on my laptop. At 1:58 p.m., Karen appeared at the fence. Then two parents. Then three kids in swimsuits. They stood there expectant. At 2:03 p.m., Karen knocked loudly on the fence. I stepped outside but didn't unlock it. Yes. I asked calmly. You saw the notice, she said. I did. We're here to discuss restoring access. There's nothing to restore. A child tugged at her arm. Can we go in? Karen didn't take her eyes off me. We've always used this pool. I haven't agreed to that. A man beside her crossed his arms. You're being difficult. I'm being consistent. Karen inhaled sharply. This is bigger than you. That sentence hung heavier than she probably intended. Bigger than you. I looked around at the small gathering. 5 adults, 3 kids, all standing outside my fence as if proximity alone granted permission. What exactly are you asking for? I said. Shared access during reasonable hours, she replied. Supervised, of course. And liability? We'll draft something informal. Informal. In other words, unenforceable. No, I said simply. The word landed like a stone in still water. One of the parents muttered, Unbelievable. Karen's composure cracked for a second. You move in and dismantle years of tradition. I move in and enforce my deed. Silence. A breeze rustled the maple leaves above us. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started up. Karen stepped closer to the fence. You don't want to be the person who fractures this neighborhood, she said quietly. I met her gaze. I didn't fracture anything. Her expression shifted, less persuasion now, more calculation. Fine, she said finally. We'll escalate this. Escalate. That was new. They dispersed slowly, disappointed children trailing behind parents who avoided looking at me. I went back inside, but the calm I once felt in that house didn't return. Because escalation meant paperwork. It meant authority. It meant someone, somewhere, deciding whether my ownership was negotiable. That night, as I floated in the deep end under a darkening sky, the water felt colder. Across the fence, porch lights flicked on one by one in synchronized suburban rhythm. From the outside, Greenfield Oaks still looked like the picture of harmony. But I understood something now. Harmony in this neighborhood wasn't about fairness. It was about compliance. And I had just made it clear I wasn't complying. The drain, the sirens, and the explanation. The morning everything tipped over started quietly. Coffee. Laptop open on the kitchen island. Sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors. From the outside, my house looked exactly like it had the day I moved in. Orderly, calm, intentional. But underneath that calm, something had shifted. The escalation Karen promised arrived in the form of another certified letter from the Greenfield Oaks Homeowners Association. This one claimed the board would be pursuing enforcement measures regarding community obstruction. Community obstruction. I read that phrase 3 times. There was no clause cited. No legal reference. Just language designed to intimidate. A suggestion that I was interfering with something collectively owned. That afternoon, I called my insurance provider and confirmed what I already knew. If anyone entered my pool without permission and got hurt, I would be liable. No HOA tradition would shield me. That was the moment the situation crystallized. They wanted access without responsibility. They wanted tradition without paperwork. They wanted community when it benefited them, and individual ownership when it didn't. So I made a decision. If the pool was the source of the conflict, then the pool could also be the solution. Friday morning, I rented a submersible pump from a local hardware store. The clerk didn't ask questions. By noon, a thick hose ran from the deep end of my pool out toward the street drain. Water began to flow, slowly at first, then steadily. By 2 p.m., the water level had dropped a full foot. At 2:17 p.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. Karen. She stood frozen at the fence, staring at the lowering water line. Within minutes, 2 more neighbors joined her. By 2:25 p.m., she was knocking on my front door. I opened it calmly. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Draining my pool." "You can't just..." She gestured wildly toward the backyard. "That's a community feature." "No," I said evenly. "It's a liability." Her face flushed. "You're being spiteful." "I'm being responsible." She pushed past the threshold of my porch but didn't enter fully. "Children use that pool." "Not anymore." Her jaw tightened. "You can't destroy shared property." The word destroy lingered. "I'm maintaining my private property," I corrected. Behind her, more neighbors had gathered. The same faces from the meeting. The same tight expressions. But this time there was something new: panic. Because the water was visibly dropping. By 3 p.m., the shallow end steps were exposed. One of the fathers pulled out his phone. First I thought he was recording. He wasn't. He was calling the police. I stepped back inside and watched from the living room window as the patrol car rolled into Greenfield Oaks 15 minutes later. 2 officers stepped out, scanning the scene. Karen moved toward them immediately, speaking quickly, gesturing toward my yard. I waited until they approached my door. "Afternoon, sir," one officer said evenly. "We received a call about property damage." "To whose property?" I asked. He glanced back at Karen, who stood with arms folded. "They're saying you're draining a community pool." I almost smiled. "It's not a community pool," I said calmly. "It's on my deeded property." The officers asked to see documentation. I had it ready. Property survey. Closing paperwork. HOA bylaws. All organized neatly in a folder I'd prepared the night before. We walked to the backyard together. The hose continued pumping water steadily into the storm drain. The officer studied the lot lines on the survey, then looked at the fence, then at the nearly half-empty pool. "Ma'am," he called out to Karen, "this appears to be private property." Karen's composure cracked. "That's not how it's always been used," she insisted. "The previous owners allowed access." The officer nodded politely. "That doesn't make it communal." She gestured at the gathering crowd. "This affects everyone." He kept his voice calm. "Ownership affects one person." Silence fell across the yard. For the first time since I moved in, the assumption shifted. The second officer turned to me. "You're within your rights to drain your own pool." "Thank you," I replied. Karen's face reddened further. "So he can just take it away?" The officer shrugged lightly. "If it's his, yes." There it was. Not tradition. Not expectation. Ownership. The patrol car left as quietly as it arrived. Neighbors dispersed slowly, murmuring under their breath. Karen lingered the longest. "You've made your point," she said stiffly. "I didn't set out to make one," I replied. "I set out to protect myself." By sunset, the pool was nearly empty. The deep blue water that once shimmered invitingly was replaced by exposed concrete and quiet echoes. It no longer tempted children. It no longer served as a symbol. It was simply a structure on my land. That night, the neighborhood felt different. Not because I had drained the pool, but because a line had been publicly confirmed. Greenfield Oaks still looked pristine under the streetlights. Lawns trimmed. Porches glowing. Identical mailboxes casting long shadows. But something invisible had changed. The assumption that access could override ownership. The belief that pressure could override paperwork. The idea that community meant compliance. I stood at the edge of the empty pool and listened to the quiet. The same quiet I thought I was buying when I signed the mortgage papers. Only this time it wasn't fragile. It was earned.